And now, it's The Law Show on CL 650. A comprehensive look at everything you need to know about the law.
Yes, The Law Show, and welcome to the show. I'm Zach Spencer. You're listening to CL 650. And we have in studio today Joe Murphy from MurphyBattista in downtown Vancouver. And from the Kelowna office of MurphyBattista, Bill Dick joins us, came in for this. It's very nice of you to be here. Now, Joe, I got a question for you, because when you proposed the topic of today's show, which is doctor-assisted death in Canada, and it's a big story that's happening in Parliament Hill, and the Supreme Court gave them a deadline and extended the deadline. And I think the deadline's now in June, where they have to come back with some kind of legislation. So why is somebody who's involved in personal injury putting this forward as a subject for our law show this time around?
Well, Zach, there's probably two reasons. Number one, because there's so much being said today about the proposed legislation and this whole issue of doctor-assisted death, and because both my parents have died within the last few years. My father at the age of 96, my mother at the age of almost 92, and I was there and watched their deterioration and dealt with the reality of when is too long to live. And in each case, my parents were ready to go. My father was actually looking forward to going. He was convinced he was going right to heaven. And his twin brother had died 40 years earlier. So he said to the priest in the weeks leading up to his death, I can't wait to die and go to heaven because I get to see my brother again.
Mm-hmm. And you know, obviously, being in that situation with somebody who's quite elderly and well into their 90s, that they're only just hanging on for their family that's there, but there's not much quality of life there.
In some cases, and in my father's case, he didn't want to hang on because he'd had it. Everything he enjoyed doing, he'd lost the ability to do. And he said to me at one point, a week or two before he died, he said, Joe, how much longer is this going to go on for? And I said, Dad, how long do you think? And he said, too long. He was a doctor. He was a retired doctor, mentally sharp right up to his death, but physically he was worn out. He lost, as I said, the ability to enjoy everything he enjoyed, and he was ready to go on to the next step and see his brother.
Mm-hmm. And everybody's got a personal story like that.
Well, yeah, my mother remarkably lived to almost 92, and she smoked for 65 years. So for
so did your father, apparently.
Well, he smoked a little bit. He smoked a little bit.
If your mother smoked, your father smoked too.
But my mother was a nurse, and she smoked for 65 years. Not surprisingly, she had heart and lung problems, but surprisingly, she lived to almost 92.
Well, it's like my wife's grandma lived to almost 90, 89 years old, and I don't know how many cigarettes she smoked in a day. She had a great diet of white cake, cookies, liverwurst, a pot or two of coffee all to herself, and a whole bunch of cigarettes. And boy, she went kicking right to the end. So, and then at the end, it was just one of these, basically, as you mentioned, a long waiting game, because you know it's coming, but we have this law in place now where you can't expedite someone's death. And we've had situations in the 90s, a famous BC case with Sue Rodriguez and Lou Gehrig's disease, and maybe you can recap that.
Well, Zach, I'll just go back to my parents. My parents both, in the hour or two before they died, were given a very strong pain medication. And that medication, I know from reading the debate and just know from my medical knowledge, that brings about the death. That hastens that. So they were both in a palliative care program. They were both being monitored by doctors and nurses. They both got that, and at the time I thought that was a kindness.
Mm-hmm. So you think that's the medical professionals are dealing with it in that way, making them comfortable to the point where
yes, I think
leave.
That's gone on. My grandfather lived to 90, and in the end he was given medication. So there's always been this kind of medical treatment that recognizes if someone's at the end of their life, if they're dying, why not make them comfortable? How can you argue against that?
Well, this touches home for me. It was just a week and a half ago. Somebody who has actually worked here at Newcap Radio in Alberta, was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and
Ooh,
didn't make.
bad.
Yeah, he didn't make it to his second anniversary of that diagnosis. But I saw him the day that he passed away, and I went to visit him because I hadn't seen him in the palliative care unit, and he passed away that night. But he was struggling, and he was in a lot of pain. Still with it, still had his faculties about him. But, just putting myself in his hospital bed, I don't know. It's a tough one because he's a young guy. He's 54 years old, and he's got kids and the whole thing. So some people want to hang on for the last breath, and it's a different situation when you're 96. But it's a tough one. I mean, I struggle with it just watching him, not even being in a situation.
There are a lot of diseases that are just absolutely horrific in terms of what they do to you, in terms of pain and psychologically, and that's what the Supreme Court of Canada addressed, those type of scenarios.
Yeah, so where are we with this legislation? And the government's going to put forward legislation that excludes certain things like children under a certain age and psychiatric issues and what have you. Are you up to speed on where they are with it?
I've got a long answer to that short question. The Supreme Court of Canada in February 2015 came out with a judgment which said the law as it stood was contrary to the Charter and had to be changed. And the law then, Zach, and it hasn't been changed yet, is
but
the
the
criminal
question
code.
Before you jump in there,
Yep.
why if the Supreme Court said it was didn't pass the test of our code, why wasn't that the case in the early 90s with Sue Rodriguez? Because our Charter of Rights and Freedoms hasn't changed as my knowledge in the 25 years.
I think the understanding or appreciation of the effect of the Charter of Rights has changed. It evolves. Over time. You get cases that change things or refine things, and
So
in this case,
is it precedent setting in the Supreme Court? Is based on precedent?
To a degree.
Yeah.
To a degree, with the judges always aware that sometimes things change or should change, and that the law has to adjust.
So someone's obviously challenged this again at the federal level in order for them to come forward and say that it doesn't meet the Charter, right?
Sue Rodriguez was a woman in 1990s, a BC woman who went to court in BC, who went to the Court of Appeal in BC, and who went to the Supreme Court of Canada because she was dying of ALS, and she wanted the right to have her life ended. And the courts in the end, the Supreme Court of Canada, said, no, we're going to leave the criminal code as is. Now, the Criminal Codes Act doesn't say that it's against the law to commit suicide, but it does say it's against the law to help someone terminate their life. And that help could be a doctor, could be a nurse, could be a pharmacist providing medications. So,
but that was 26 years ago. So what's changed? Why have they kicked it back now and said it has to be changed?
Well, because a woman by the name of Fraser thought, I'm dying. She lives in BC, and she went to court and said, things have changed now. Things are different. My disease is different. I'm different. And we think the way the courts are interpreting the Charter of Rights is different.
That's what I wanted to get at. There's obviously another appeal or another. It's gone in front of the Supreme Court again.
It did, and there's Fraser and Clark, two women who went before the Supreme Court of Canada again. And one of the things that the Supreme Court of Canada said, because they're aware that they had previously upheld that same legislation, was that values in society changed as well. Our society changes, our interpretation changes. And
just look at our values and our outlook on things like gay marriage and people being out. And I mean, it's changed so quickly in a marijuana law. I mean, that's going to be the next one on the docket for the government.
Yep.
So you were starting your explanation of this, Joe. I don't want you to pick up on where you left off.
In the most recent case, February 2015, the Supreme Court of Canada said that a competent adult who firstly clearly consents to having their life end, and secondly, and I'm using their words, has a grievous and irremediable medical condition, which could be an illness, disease, or disability, that causes enduring suffering that is intolerable to the individual, is entitled to a system which allows them to end their life. I don't use the word suicide because I just have a different understanding of what suicide is. Suicide isn't someone whose life is intolerable, who says, I want to end it. I regard suicide as sort of an irrational decision, where if someone has the irremediable medical condition that makes their life intolerable, I don't think that decision would necessarily be irrational. I think it could be rational. Could be, because it's a system that allows people under certain circumstances to do it, and the Supreme Court in February 2015 said to the government, we'll give you a year to change the law. The election in late 2014 led to a change of governments. The new government went to the Supreme Court and said, we need more time because we've just come on board, and it was extended to the end of June. And we've now seen the government bill that comes out, and many people say the bill goes too far, and other people say the bill doesn't go far enough.
Well, we'll pick up on that, and also look at other jurisdictions where they have this kind of law. Oregon, just south of us. When we pick it up, you're listening, I should say, to The Law Show on CL 650. Joe Murphy, QC, is my guest from MurphyBattista, and from the Kelowna office, Bill Dick, and we'll speak to them more about this next here on CL 650.
There's more of the show still ahead. This is The Law Show on CL 650.